Hello everyone. Today I have the prestigious honor of interviewing Tom Goldsborough. And, he's here today on behalf of the AAC, the Arkansas Academy of Computing.
Thanks for inviting me, Karen.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you here today. So first, can we just hear a bit about your background, like how you started in the field of computing?
Well, it was one of those happenstance situations, as a matter of fact. I have a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the university. Graduated in '58. Went to interview in Chicago on a lark because I'd never seen Chicago and I thought it might be interesting. Turns out the Rock Island Railroad offered me the best job offer for a management trainee position. And so I went there, moved to Chicago, spent 7 years in Chicago. And in the course of my travels to learn what the company was about and how it operated, I reported to the chief financial officer, but they wanted me to have an understanding of the operation. Part of that was what they called then data processing. And I said, I don't have any interest in going to see what they do there. And they said, well, if you're going to be a general manager, you're going to have to understand what they do and how it might help you. And long story short, they were preparing to install the first major general purpose computer in Chicago and
Wow.
needed some additional staff. And so they sent me to programming school after an aptitude test, and I ended up with my first couple of years of computing at that site. Then joined Kraft Foods and spent 3 years, and then joined IBM in sales and sales management for 35, and then retired in 2000.
Wow. So what was your initial impression of just entering the computer world? Like, when you
Well,
first saw
it was exciting because it was all new. We had really a run of the company operation in terms of acceptance, which was great. And at the time I joined, we had some significant enhancements in computing capability. Prior to that, everything had been done really with card systems. There were a few computers in a general purpose nature, but they were fixed in terms of how you programmed them. You didn't have symbolic languages, and you didn't have stored programming. You essentially wrote the programs in literal form
analog.
on a drum, a magnetic drum, so you did have some sort of access storage from a peripheral point of view, but it was far different than what we call computing today. So at the advent of this new era, you were able to have significant amount of storage in magnetic tape then, and then later random access. But the beginning was just an incredible enhancement of speed, computing capability in terms of internal symbolic languages, and then the ability to manage vast amounts of data, which was what that particular company was all about. They had lots of reporting requirements and lots of analytical requirements in terms of their competition. So we had a pretty free rein to look at company operations and learn a lot about them, and people liked us.
Because you got things done.
We had the big new powerful systems. Computing historically has always, I think rightly so, tried to focus on how do you help the end user operation. Economies of scale sometimes cause you to concentrate those in large data centers. But with the advent of networking and personal computing and other ways to disperse those capabilities, you know by today's standards that without computing in your hands individually, it doesn't feel very comfortable. You don't want to rely on somebody else. You want to have the capability where under your control and your direction.
Everything.
But it took a long while to get there.
Keep everything kind of in-house, I guess.
Right.
So what was your personal reaction to first having to program?
Well, it was a new, fun learning experience. Interestingly enough, in my first programming class, we not only had a number of people from the Chicago area, but we had folks from Saudi Arabia. We had people from England. I mean, it was a concentrated, new opportunity, and so there was a far-reaching impact, much beyond, you know, our little sphere that we were working in. And you had lots of wait time in those days for product to come and for you to be able to actually install the system. But you had lots of code to write too, so you needed some time. And testing was always done at the data center. Not, you know, nobody had their own systems to test with, so you had 30 or maybe 45-minute time slices where you would take your programs and compile them and run test data. And so sometimes late at night, it was one of those exciting but demanding kind of environments, which it's sort of like being a student, if you know.
Yes. Very much familiar with spending long hours trying to find, okay,
Right.
syntax and trying to measure everything out correctly. So you mentioned that you also worked for Kraft Foods
Right.
for a short amount of time.
Uh-huh.
What did your work there entail?
Well, a little bit of the same thing. By that time, we had a new family of computing. At that designation was called 360, which is really the basis of a lot of the architecture that we still use today. Bits and bytes really came out of that operating system and programming language design. Before then, it was not quite that far-reaching, and there were no operating systems, and so Kraft was a little bit more in terms of trying to get our production sites tied in on a national basis. So we had a half dozen data centers from coast to coast that we were preparing for and doing a lot of analysis, again, for our primary operating divisions, either in production or sales or distribution. And it was very much trying to help us do a better job from the standpoint of the company's position and its product growth and its customer satisfaction.
I see. Did this entail working with databases in primitive form?
Well, we were still a little bit before databases at that point in time. We had lots of data, and we had some ways to access them, but random access was not the standard in those days. You did lots of sorting, and typically your mass files were on magnetic tape. It was not too long after that, I think database software, so to speak, as we might think of it today, was really not around until the early 70s. And so this was a bit before that. You were beginning to do things like collect data directly from the individual sites as opposed to having it go and be keyed by some sort of a focused staff, like a keying pool or a data entry pool. And in those early days, one of the earliest forms was paper tape transmission. You probably may not even have seen that, but basically it was a way to get data in a symbolic form, usually pure numeric, to through some sort of a telecommunication line, usually dial-up. And it was slow compared to today, but it was essentially, again, trying to get things captured at the very source of where they occurred, as opposed to having them, you know, translated and rekeyed 2 or 3 times in the process. If you really try to think about where we are today, envision a world without cell phones, with no networking, with no random access, with no software that was accepted on a large-scale basis for database manipulation or for searches. Obviously no World Wide Web. no standard personal computing software or hardware. It was things done on larger scale systems in computing applications. So you typically had a staff of technicians managed by somebody who was on a peer level with the director of finance or the treasurer. But still it was concentrated where you had to pull everything into a large data center in order to really manage the systems.
Was Kraft Foods also located in Chicago?
Kraft was located in Chicago, right. Yeah, and we had some concentration of our centers. We had people from New York and Dallas and from the West Coast who came in to become a part of a concentrated staff for the design and the installation of our data centers across the country.
Very interesting. So from there you also moved on to IBM, is that correct?
I joined IBM in '65 in Little Rock, as a matter of fact. Spent 11 years in Little Rock.
Well, that's a migrate south.
Yeah, it was. It was coming back home a little bit. And then I went from there to St. Louis, still with IBM. Was only there about a little over a year, and then spent about 27 years in Kansas City, and that's where I retired from.
So where were you originally from?
I grew up in Fort Smith.
Oh, okay.
Went to school here
Okay.
in Fayetteville, and then moved to Chicago on graduation.
So it was kind of like the coming home, I guess. For
It was. It was. I was interested in opportunities here, and I had an opportunity. Actually, I was on the corporate staff. Kraft was a part of a group called National Dairy Products at that point in time. You may have heard of that. Seal Test ice cream. A lot of products were on the East Coast and not so much in the Midwest or the Southwest. But we worked together from the standpoint of the design of and implementation of those. So I had an opportunity to go to Philadelphia, to New York, stay in Chicago, and then I looked for an opportunity in Arkansas and was lucky to join IBM here.
So you mentioned that you did sales management, is that correct? With IBM?
Right.
Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah. Well, when I first joined IBM, I was a systems engineer, which basically meant somebody who helped with design, with recommendation of software, both application design as well as operating systems. And I was a sales rep in the Little Rock branch, as I said, for 11 years. My primary accounts were the state government, the universities, and the secondary schools. And then when I went to St. Louis, I was in a regional staff kind of group, again, looking at new product, new ways of approaching problem solving for computing. And then in management, went to Kansas City, and I had manufacturing, distribution, retail, a whole potpourri really of industry customers there.
So while you were in the state capital here, Arkansas, you were primarily working on products that would go for the state. Is that correct? Do you have any particular encounters that you may have remembered with either school management or?
Well, I'd say both from a timing standpoint and from the opportunities in the state government at that point were probably realized under Governor Bumpers. Dale Bumpers had an outstanding set of cabinet members, very forward-thinking, and it was there that there was a lot of concentration on planning for the different departments in the state, as well as developing databases and information systems kinds of exchange, so that you couldn't just serve only program needs, but that the administration could have a real feel for the demographics of the state that were being served and how cost effective they were and how much they were able to bring the services that they intended to the citizenry. So that was probably the greatest experience in terms of making progress. I really was there under the administrations of Winthrop Rockefeller and Dale Bumpers and David Pryor. So worked in all of those, but probably Bumpers had the greatest emphasis overall.
Very interesting. So, did your family move with you? Like,
Yes, yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Well, I have 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, and my oldest is far older than it seems he should be, but he's currently taking leave from Accenture and is part of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. As a matter of fact, they'll be going to China for a week, and their experience and just here in a couple of weeks before the end of the month. So while he's not in, none of them are really in computing per se, but you know, they've had their own sets of careers that have been impacted in one way or another because they've certainly been able to utilize those capabilities, and it's almost a necessity, as you well know from your own experience. And so they've had a different kind of expertise that they've built that's probably what we might call more application-oriented and applied science of using that technology in their day-to-day work. And so it's been fun to see them grow and to make their own niches, so to speak.
So it sounds like, are they all involved in more international style of business now?
No, not really. My youngest son works for Applebee's. He's in public relations and marketing. And my middle son works for Sprint, and he's more involved in the direct marketing of personal computing support software. And my only daughter is still an undergrad at Indiana, so she's finishing her junior year this year, as a matter of fact.
Sounds like you got quite a troop going.
I have a good troop, I do.
Yeah. So, were there any moments in time that you distinctly remember getting like a wow, like all of a sudden a horizon has opened up to you that you maybe with computers or maybe with certain applications? Have you ever had it?
Well, one of my assignments with IBM was I think they were all enjoyable. I have to say that I was lucky in the time that I've spent and with the experiences that I had. For a while, IBM really placed a greater emphasis on marketing to research universities. And we had a group that was organized just for that. So I had responsibility during that period of time for universities in 10 states in the Midwest. And that was a real interesting and exciting set of experiences because we were trying to help universities expand their focus on computing and the effectiveness of computing. So supercomputing was just on the horizon at that point in time. We really had just begun to understand the beginnings of the internet, the World Wide Web. There was lots of things to learn and lots of ways to try to help, our academic customers get involved in that. And it was also during that period of time where we introduced the personal computer. So you had this real range of computing impact with lots of startup kinds of characteristics to it as well. And so there was some trial and error, and you had some people who we called early adopters who were brave souls to sort of jump in the stream before anybody else. And those experiences, you got to work closely with deans, you got to work closely with people who were involved in research, and you got to see some of the brighter ideas that were being accumulated in terms of grant applications and the results that they were getting in terms of forwarding either scientific efforts or just the running of the universities and the support of the students in their studies.
So was this in Missouri or Kansas?
Well, I lived in Kansas City at the time, but I had responsibility for Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma,
Whoa.
and Texas. And obviously I wasn't the only person that was involved in that. I was supporting the marketing teams who had the primary responsibility in the interface to their individual universities. But at the same time, we were working with the major universities in each of those states, and so you got to see some comparative efforts at a pretty high level in terms of, who was focused and had the resources and the concentration and had convinced their particular administrations to put more emphasis on it. So we saw some exciting things.
Which one of the states gave the better effort, in your opinion?
Well, there were good efforts in all of them. I'll have to say that across the board, and in different facets. But I would say Michigan, Illinois, and Texas probably had as great an emphasis on building their computing resources as anybody.
So, did you ever deal with the U of A directly?
I did. I had a staff of about a half a dozen folks who worked for me to provide resources, and I had a graduate of the university who happened to live in Oklahoma City at the time, but he had the University of Oklahoma, the University of Arkansas, and Oklahoma State at the same time.
So, can you tell us how you came to be inducted into the AAC? Which is a pretty high
Well,
honor.
I think it's a matter of age. Again, you don't always control the timing of your career. I happen to be very fortunate to be in the early, development and adoption of computing as a mainstream resource. And of course, with ties to the university and with being, involved in computing in Arkansas, I have people who are my friends who've been probably closer to the College of Engineering and the development and establishment of the Arkansas Academy of Computing. And so I think I was included because of having been with them and having known them, but also just of the time and responsibilities that we had. So we have a really good representation, I think, of different industries and different backgrounds, and a collage of folks who have made major contributions to computing adaptation and adoption in Arkansas itself.
Well, you certainly seem to have a lot of things of your own underneath your belt, a lot of experiences and a lot of...
Well, it was a fun career. In retrospect, it seems to have gone really fast. At the time when we had the major problems, it seemed awfully slow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll bet. So have you had a mentor that kind of pushed you into this field, or some...
Well, I've had lots of mentors, as a matter of fact, and many of them in the academy itself. One of my real privileges and ironies is the man who was the longtime branch manager in Little Rock is a gentleman named Jerry Heil. Heil is a member of the academy. I first met Heil because he was our marketing rep on the Rock Island Railroad in Chicago. I came to Little Rock before he came, but it really is one of those interesting coincidences that occur sometimes in your career that you just feel real good about. He's been one of those guys who has always been helpful, always interested in you individually, and you'll hear the same story from lots of other people who worked in that branch office. and at the same time really encouraging you positively and pushing you to do your best. And that's the kind of thing that we, I think, had going for us in those days when we were doing new things that really hadn't been done before, but it was fun to do.
So the work environment was just as important as perhaps the technology that you were
Yeah,
working.
very much so. One of the quotes that I attribute to Heil was, he said, "I don't care how long you work. If you can get your job done in an hour, that's fine, but if it takes 24, that's what I expect." Most of the time it took him 22 or 23. But you had that kind of, yes, we had managers to provide support for us and encouragement and structure in terms of managing our career. But there was just a lot of individual, self-commitment to make things happen and to help provide solutions for our customers that they in turn made happen. So it was a great work environment in terms of encouragement, recognition, competition, wanting, striving to make things really work the best that you could.
Was that a similar experience in all the places that you worked?
Well, I was lucky enough that I think I would say it was similar. Yeah, very much so. Tom Watson, the founder of IBM, really, focused on what he called the basic beliefs, and there was, lots to the meaning of it, but it really surrounded on, three basic beliefs, and that is respect for the individual, pursuit of excellence in everything we do, and best customer service in the world. I mean, that was his mantra. And you can have lots of things that kind of fall into categories like that support those ideals. But I found that consistently across the board in every IBM location that I worked. And it was one of those things that we could easily relate to and translate into the way we interacted with our customers and what we were trying to accomplish with them and for them.
Seems like a couple of those have escaped into the Universal Engineering Declaration of, I guess it was a morality code or something.
Oh, good.
That's been taught recently in classes, just how the purpose of being an engineer and the things you need to look for in your work,
right,
and be dedicated to. So, it's nice to see that some of those things, hear about the origin of some of those things.
Yeah, you bet.
So, do you have any pieces of advice for today's generation in the computing world?
Well, we always used to say that we are just at the threshold of what computing can do. And it turned out in every decade that was right. And I think we're probably still in that same position, even though we can look back and see lots of ways we have improved the environment of computing and the effectiveness of computing. We're probably still at the threshold. The miniaturization of what we're able to do with circuitry and logic and storage is mind-boggling. And now with networking, where you really have the leverage and the ability of interacting with several hundred nodes of networks and computers at each one of those is still very exciting to me. And I think all you have to do is go on a Google search and see the results that you get to appreciate a little bit of the impact. And lots of fun things are being supported. I have an interest in genealogy, and so does my wife. And those kinds of search engines are just so important in being able to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together. And I can only kind of imagine what researchers must feel like today when they can really have a much better opportunity to make a difference by having all of this massive data available to them in some sort of a fairly organized form that they can be incisive about when they're asking or forming questions or premises, and be able to get a lot further along with their development than when I first began my career out of college. It's really encouraging to see what people can do and what essentially brain power can do, given the amount of tools and the sophistication of the tools that are available to them. So I think we're still right on the threshold of what computing can do.
Any predictions?
Well, it's interesting. We're all, I think, enamored by those pieces of industry or research or academia that we're not as close to. And for example, the year I graduated, there's a picture in the yearbook. The fall of '57 was when Sputnik was launched by the Russians, the first orbiter. And there is a picture in our yearbook of the guys in architecture with their stick in the ground saying, if the Russians can do it, we can too, but it looked a lot more like a Roman candle than it did any sort of a thruster. And you can essentially look back at your experiences and say how lucky you were to have been on the fringes of that. We had a lot of IBMers involved with NASA, for example. In fact, we had one of our members of the staff in Little Rock who came to work for IBM from NASA. And so going through the focus of what John Kennedy challenged us with in putting a man on the moon and returning them safely to Earth, which is always the part to me that really kind of framed what we were meaning to do, it is, I think, an astounding accomplishment in one decade. Going from nowhere to have accomplished that, to have the sophistication that still is the basic premise of the space program today. And I think that's an example of one of those things where you see the end result is maybe more than you could have imagined. So I think the net of what has always impressed me is I don't think there's any facet of academic endeavor, of research, of industry, of life that can't be served by effective application of computing. Healthcare has gotten so much focus today, and I think rightly so. And I think computing will play a large role, continue to play a large role in what we can do to discover medicines or procedures or, combating diseases, prolonging our healthy lives that will make an unending contribution to the way that we live. And I think all we have to do is kind of trip down memory lane, so to speak, to find out that, we've already done a lot of those things, but there's
Still so
a
far.
long horizon ahead of us. That's what we're planning on you doing.
That's our job.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for today.
Thank you
very
very
much for sharing your experiences with us and imparting
My
your
pleasure.
wisdom. He was a farmer raised in Oklahoma, out near Enid.
I went to Eden often for the Tri-State Band Festivals.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, he was a wordsmith rather than a math or computer fellow. So he eventually moved out to California and did some work over there for several newspapers, and then came back here, moved to Fayetteville. So.
Neat. Well, just so you might get a look at what we were proud of in the year I graduated. Here's the College of Engineering. This is their big computer on campus at the time.
Oh, wow.